One of the reasons why our black raspberries and our regular red raspberries grow so differently is because they're actually a different species. Guten Yardening, everybody! It is a fantastic day out here, and I'm standing in front of one of our favorite raspberry bushes. This is a summer-bearing black raspberry. It grows quite differently than our fall-bearing raspberry, for example, our heritage raspberry, which I talked about in a previous video. And so in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about how a summer-bearing raspberry grows, and I also want to show you how we prune it back. This is a really important thing to note because if you're growing two different varieties, you're going to want to handle them slightly differently. And you'll notice that I do have gloves on today because this raspberry has some thorns and it's not playing around. All right, let's get up close and take a look at how this plant grows. In our last video, when I showed you our fall-bearing heritage raspberry, one of the things I talked about was how widely this plant can spread, especially from the underground root system where it just pops up canes every single year. And so we're not just looking at one single area, we're looking at a massive expansion. But our summer-bearing black raspberry grows completely differently. You'll notice that the canes are much longer. Some of these are expanding out, I would say 15 feet from the base, but we're not seeing a massive growth or expansion of the roots away from the main plant. So one of the big differences in terms of the summer bearing versus our fall bearing varieties is how it spreads and how it grows at the base. We still see one bush-like area here at the bottom, but our canes are what are developing that length rather than that root expansion and those shoots coming up along the way. On our fall-bearing varieties, our first-year canes, our primocanes, are going to grow and produce fruit right at the end of the cane on the first year, and then produce a second crop on the floricane or the second-year canes that second season. But that's a huge difference between our summer-bearing and our fall-bearing varieties, because here we see the beginnings of some beautiful primocanes. You can see that really nice green color. These canes are going to grow up and get longer and longer, but in the first year, they're not going to produce any fruit. It's the second year growth. These floricanes that are now, instead of that green, they're like a nice deep red color. These are going to be sending out the fruit. So this is where we're going to see the fruit developing this season. And now, just like the fall bearing plants, once these floricanes, these second year canes, have fruited, they're done completely. So all of this really extensive growth from all of these canes, and you can see all the fruit that were on here already from last season, these are completely finished and they need to be cut back and removed. They're not going to fruit again, but before I remove these, before I cut them back, I want to show you one more thing about how these plants can spread. First of all, you'll notice that we did trellis all of these canes. I mean, with canes this long, they have to be trellised in some way, and this is just one solution that we came up with. They seem to like to move around and be, I guess, threaded through this kind of fence. But last season, these spread the whole way around, completely over to one of our other trellises. And you can see we've already cut this off, this particular cane off. And this is a good 12 to 14 feet at least away from the main plant. And so this cane grew out all the way here. You can see some of the laterals coming off of here. I'm going to be careful because these are still nice and sharp. And what happens with this variety is where the cane bends down and touches the ground, well, we get rooting. And this is one of the ways that this particular type of raspberry spreads. And so as I bring my hand down here, I'm going to move this away and I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. You see this piece of cane right down in here? That's exactly what happened. It touched the ground, and now we have this plant spreading all the way over here. So one of the ways that you can avoid this type of raspberry spreading is to do exactly what we did. You need to trellis it. You keep it up off the ground, keep these canes up off the ground, and you're not going to see this plant spreading. It's very different in that way from our fall-bearing heritage variety. Now, that being said, this isn't the only way that this variety can spread. It can also spread from the berries that drop off those seeds, and you can use cuttings if you'd like. You can cut off these pieces of the green of the stem itself, and you can plant those and it will grow roots. I mean, just as simply as this piece, again, another piece of the plant was able to create the roots that we see here. And if we left these in the ground, we'd have a whole nother set, a brand new set of this delicious black raspberry, if that's what we wanted. But what we don't want to do is leave all of these floricanes in here, all of these second year that are past their fruiting stages. We don't want to leave them in here and create this overcrowding. It also prevents us from really being able to designate the direction of what's growing up here. We don't want to allow this to grow in areas we don't like. For example, these floricanes are growing off to the left away from our trellis, which is not ideal. Instead, we want to be able to push them in the direction that makes it easiest for us to harvest. If you're just letting these droop off everywhere, then you're going to have a really hard time accessing the fruit. And again, reaching in here when this is in full bloom is not ideal, especially when you get up close and you see, as little as some of these thorns may look on here, they don't feel little when they're catching onto your clothing or onto your arms or your skin. So I want to come in here and I want to trim this back. I want to cut back all of these big canes that are no longer needed in here, all of these big canes that have already fruited and won't fruit again, and I'm going to leave just a couple of these canes left. And realistically, you're probably at a plant like this going to be looking at a maximum of 4 or 5 canes left down in here, if that, once you've trimmed back, depending on how much is developed. If you want a healthy plant, you've got to cut these canes back to give room for all of this brand new growth. All right, I got my gloves back on, and I will point this out one more time, that to tell the difference between these different canes, our first canes, our primocanes, are nice and green. You can see that color, that first year growth. Our floricanes that are still going to produce fruit have that nice deep red color. On the summer bearing variety, along that floricane, we see these lateral fruiting stems, and at the ends of these is where we're going to start to see that fruit development all along the cane. And our floricanes that are completely expended are a different kind of grayish brown color. These are the ones we want to get rid of. And just like our fall bearing variety, we want to go down as low as we can in the plant, as close to the base of the plant, to remove these canes. Remember, the roots of these plants are perennials, but the canes, they last 2 years and then they're gone. So you can see from years past, some of the places where we've already cut this back, again, as low as we could get in here. And we're going to do the same thing this year, coming in and cutting these down. And some of these are easier to clip back than others. And once we've cut it, now comes the task of removing it from the trellising. So that's my next line of work in here. I've got to get this out of here and remove from the trellising. And I'm not going to shy away from composting all this as well, cutting it into small pieces. There's nothing here that needs to go to waste. It's provided us fruit. Now it can break down and provide us some compost. What an absolutely stunning difference once you've cleaned back all of those floricanes that are no longer going to fruit. I mean, this is wide open. It opens up so many possibilities in terms of what we can now do for all of this brand new primocane growth that's happening down here. We're going to be able to put this exactly where we want it along this trellis. And then, of course, we have to make some decisions about all of these other potential plants over here, whether or not we want to keep them or do something else with them. But most important of all, we're ensuring healthy growth by opening up this space, by allowing this plant to develop for years to come, this wonderful, amazing tasting black raspberry. And next up, we do need to take care of our other summer bearing raspberries as well, as they have to go through that same process of pruning. I would like to say one more thing in favor of this amazing black raspberry, and that is that even though raspberries tend to like nice full sun, this one's been growing really well and producing amazing fruit for us, even in a shaded area. So maybe that's something else to keep in mind as you're planting or growing your raspberries. We really hope you enjoyed this video and learned a little bit more about taking care of your summer-bearing raspberries. They are a wonderful addition to the garden, one that we hope we can encourage you to try out. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.